Hi, so good afternoon for people in the UK and good morning people in the States. This is Shiraz Ziya from the TERMIS-EU BPC Committee. So we've got a special webinar lined up for you today with Viktor, and we're going over something called the Customer Discovery Tool and a Business Model Canvas. So we think this will be really useful for those who are either entering the competition or have entered this year, and also for anyone looking to develop a business plan. It's a great model to use. So just as a quick summary, we've actually been reviewing the round 2 applications, and the 5 finalists will be presenting at the TERMIS-EU conference next week in Davos in Switzerland. So hopefully some of you can make it out to see those presentations. If you can't, I'll be sharing short 20-second clips which are from the pitch videos from each team. So you'll be able to see what the company is about and also see some of the people in person as it was. So our schedule for today, it's a very good webinar we've got from Viktor lined up. So 12:30 we're opening this now, and we'll have a keynote from Viktor very shortly, followed by a Q&A session, which we can extend if we wish. So if you're not following us already, make sure you follow our Twitter account, and we'll definitely be tweeting next week at the conference, so you'll be able to see all the pictures and favored quotes throughout the competition itself. So today we have Viktor Brandtneris, who's the owner of Lean Startup Consultants at Brandtneris Consulting in the USA. So Viktor has a diverse financial and management background from corporate entrepreneurial environments, and he's also been involved in lots of, as you can see, a number of different transactions throughout his career, and recently is now part of the teaching team at the USC Innovation and Michigan centers, and also involved in a number of different programs, whether at universities or government agencies and corporate clients, and also with early stage companies. So he's got a very, very broad range of expertise, and we hope that he'll be able to translate that into some content you'll find useful here today for your own companies or developing your interests. So with that, I'll pass over to Viktor for his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction, Shiraz. I'm sorry about the technical glitch here. Just to fill in a little bit more on Shiraz's comments, besides being an entrepreneur myself, after starting my career working for IBM, I'm now an instructor for the United States' National Science Foundation Innovation Corps program. And it's a program where we take academics who have created patentable technology and run them through a 6 to 7 week program to explore the commercial viability of their idea. And that's how I met Susie Taba, who is part of this group, part of the committee organizing this presentation, and she asked me to come in and give a quick overview of what some of the things that we touch on in the I-Corps program. So this works best if it's interactive. I understand that's a little bit clunky with webinars and WebEx, but please, if you can type questions into the chat box, Shiraz can feed those on to me, and I will answer them as we go, and then we'll just have an open forum Q&A at the end. So it's my understanding that this is a business plan competition, and so this opening part could be a little bit difficult because we don't do business plans anymore. But we used to think, and to get into some of that, I will, what we used to believe back in the day, back when I started my first company now many decades ago, was that startups were really just small versions of large companies. And so essentially that somebody building a plane from a kit for his friends and neighbors was the same as Boeing or Airbus. That really all it was a shrunk down version of a big company. And you know, we used to go through these massive processes to understand that and to highlight that, and based off of that assumption, we always used to think that we would build a business plan and we'd include some financial statements, and the business plan was amazingly thick and amazingly detailed. And of course, the financial statements had to be accurate. They must have been accurate because they were 5 years out and they were accurate to 2 decimal points. We had answers down to 2 decimal points. So how could they possibly be wrong? Well, the reality is that neither of those things ever worked. I also invest at this stage in my career. I invest in startup companies, and the next company whose financial statement is accurate 1 year from now will be the first company that has ever been accurate 1 year from now. The reality is that we used to spend a great deal of time worrying about the mechanics of how things worked in startups, and we were concentrating on the wrong thing. We used to go through this the waterfall process of development, as we used to call it. With you'd go out and you'd raise a little bit of money, you develop your product, you do you'd get to a point of is this an alpha, beta testable product, and then you'd ship it out and you'd ship it to your customers and essentially hope that everything worked well. And there were also other, as the business plan would lay out all sorts of wonderful things that had to happen. We'd have marketing people worrying about, what the marketing collateral had to be. Would they be setting up your brand? They'd be building all sorts of public relations activities. There'd be some massive, wonderful, ludicrously over-expensive launch events. My first startup, we had our launch event at the World Trade Center at the windows on the world at the very top there, and spent a small fortune on all of that. Then we'd get involved in sales, and then as the product developed, we'd add sales. We'd add we'd add a sales staff, we'd add sales organizations, and then there'd be engineering activities that would go on. And if you see here is this massive infrastructure that's being built around an idea that there's actually one person who's missing, and it's the most critical person who's missing in this entire process. And nowhere on this slide is the customer. Nowhere on this slide is the person who actually will be buying and or using your product. They're implied in some of these boxes, and if we look at the marketing and the sales piece, we're talking about how we're going to get at that person. But nowhere in this process did we really talk to the customer and find out what it was that he or she wanted. And so this process was very good at one particular activity, and that was burning through investor money. I can attest and commit to or admit to the idea that I have left smoking holes in the ground where some of my money used to be, because I insisted that a startup follow this path. And through much of the 80s, 90s, we followed this approach, and we had a lot of false starts with how startups worked. Because the moral of the story is that startups don't fail because they lack processes. They fail because they lack customers. And the thing that I see repeatedly in the I-Corps program, the thing that I see repeatedly in my consultancy, the thing that I see repeatedly even when I'm doing corporate consultation for this template and this model, is that there is a presumption that the customer exists and the customer believes exactly what you believe the problem is and what the solution has to be. And what I'm going to show you for the rest of this presentation, and again, this is almost a 100,000-foot flyby of the process. This normally takes 6 weeks to get through, is to get an understanding of exactly what it is that your customer wants from you. What problem is it that they want solved? More importantly, what problem is it that they want solved that they will pay you to solve? There are a lot of problems out there that people would like to have solved, but aren't going to pay for. And so part of this process is to make sure you're building something that somebody actually wants and will use. And given that many of you have medical applications, the path to market is long, expensive, and filled with many potholes. So I would encourage you to embrace the process I'm going to lay out here for you as a way to make sure you're not building the wrong thing, so you don't have to go back into the lab and make adjustments along the way. And again, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box, and I'll have Shiraz just step in and we can talk about those questions. So if the old process is wrong, or if the old process was failing, what do we know now? What do we understand now? And the biggest difference is that what we've learned is that startups search, and while companies execute on the business plans. Startups are searching for the solution that needs to be built, are searching for the answer to the problem. Companies execute on the plan. When I was at IBM, we had 5-year plans, and we had all this infrastructure built around making sure that we executed on that 5-year plan, and the numbers were comparatively close. We knew that we might do, $1 billion in this quarter and $2 billion that quarter, because we had this infrastructure that was designed to execute on that. What IBM and many large companies, and I'm not picking on IBM, it's just that I worked there, was that they were rarely agile enough back in the day to come up with the solutions that a startup could come up with. I remember I was in the semiconductor division at IBM, and I was doing strategic and capital planning on chipsets. And to show you how old I am, I was making a presentation to the general manager for that facility, and he was reading his newspaper as I was talking about the chipset for the new personal computers that IBM was going to bring out. And about 5 minutes into the presentation, he slammed his fist on the desk and said, "Brandtneris, that personal computer BS is never going to take off." And he stood up and walked out of the room. Big companies are not great at embracing radical change. If you look at the huge companies that we have right now that have grown up in the last 5 years, they started out, or the last 10 years, they started out as very small companies, people like Facebook and Amazon and Priceline and Uber. These are organizations that saw a problem, understood that it needed solving, and then were able to build a business model around it. They've now transitioned into the execute mode. They've transitioned into, now I have to build the infrastructure around this. And sometimes that comes with painful transitions. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple early back in the 90s. Travis Kalanick just today resigned from Uber. So there are growing pains. Now, we can get into why they were fired or had to resign, but the reality is what a startup has to do versus what a company has to do is very different. And so what I want to walk you through is how you are on the left side of this slide. You're on the search side. I'm going to focus in on customer discovery and customer validation. What problem is it that you are solving for somebody? What is it that you can do that nobody else is doing today? What is your unique value, and is it something that your customer wants to have solved? Too often I'm working with a group of from 15 teams from around the world right now, 5 from China, 5 from the US, 5 from the British Isles, and one of the solutions is clean water. And the answer I got from the team is, well, why do we have to have clean water? And the team was, well, everybody knows we need to have clean water. And we've always known that we've had to have clean water, but why isn't the problem being solved? Why hasn't the problem been solved to date? And obviously this team, is figuring out that it gets very complex when you start going into foreign countries and telling them how to change their infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more going on that I want you to be able to understand about your infrastructure and your ecosystem, so that should you decide to pursue commercialization, you're not going to run into the road. You're going to run into these roadblocks regardless, but I'd rather have you see these roadblocks ahead of time so that you can plan and come up with solutions to get around that. So instead of creating a business plan, instead of creating this 100-page document with financial plans and marketing plans, etc., what I want you to create is a business model. And what a business model is, a scalable, repeatable way to deliver your product to your customer. And as Shiraz mentioned during the introduction, the template we're using these days is called the Business Model Canvas. And this is the outgrowth of Steve Blank and Alex Osterwalder, both at Stanford University. They're the parents, if you will, of this template. And essentially on one sheet of paper, you should be able to explain to anyone what it is that you do and how you're going to accomplish this. Now, the reality is there are a lot of sheets of paper that support this. There's a lot of data that goes into these answers. Yet the biggest piece here that I want to get across is that with one sheet of paper, one 8.5, 11 slide in your PowerPoint, you can explain to somebody exactly how this would work, exactly how you're going to go from your laboratory, your engineering facility, to your customer's location. And those are some of the, and so if you're looking for the book, it's called Business Model Generation, and it's very easy to find. It's a very quick read. It goes into some of the details of these 9 boxes. What I want to concentrate on today, though, is these two in particular, the value proposition and the customer segment. And within the parlance of the business model canvas, when these two things link up, we call it product market fit. When you are providing a value to somebody that they have to have, then, and that they will pay you for, now you have the basis to fill in the remainder of this canvas. You can do the remainder of the canvas first, and it's all irrelevant, because if you come up with a value proposition that somebody doesn't want or somebody doesn't need, then you're going to have to change your customer segment. All the other boxes change. All the way you interact with your customer changes, the way you distribute to them, how your revenue model is set up changes. So it's really pivotal to get the value prop and the customer segment correct. And I'm going to get into that here right now. So your product sits in the middle, and at the very top center of this slide. This is what you are providing to your customer. And we have your customers down below. They are waiting for some sort of solution that you hopefully have identified. And really, the value prop falls into a couple of basic boxes. Are you relieving some sort of pain for them? Is this taking a lot? And pain can be divided, can be defined in a number of ways. It can be cost, it can be time, it can be risk, it can be negative emotions. If Travis, I'll use the Travis Kalanick example at Uber. I would think that the negative emotions about how he treated female employees was a risk that didn't need to be taken. And had he had somebody looking over his shoulder saying, this is bad, Travis, you might not want to go down this path, then he'd still be the CEO of Uber. Gain creators, are you increasing more revenue? Are you increasing patient outcomes? Are fewer people dying? Are you able to treat more people? Are you serving a population that is underserved at this point, so people are healthier, etc.? So normally there's a relationship between the two. Normally there is a relationship between a pain being relieved and the gain that's being created. And that relationship usually comes down to which customer segments that we're dealing with. So I'm going to start out with customer segments. And customer segments, I always like to open this presentation and say that, I talk about who, what, when, where, why, which I recall is what used to be the foundation of how you would write a news article. Well, it's the same thing for your business. What I want to concentrate on, though, is that how you build your product and what's inside it is really probably the least relevant piece of the equation. That yes, your customers will care about it because they'll be worried that you can deliver on your promises, but the two biggest pieces of the equation are who and why. So first of all, a customer segment is a subset of the market. Here's the definition, and if you see all word slides with me, they're sort of meant to be something that you can print out and sort of keep as a set of notes for yourself, so that you can always refer back to it. But a customer segment is that part of the marketplace that is going to make the decision to adopt your product, and they're going to do it for a specific reason. And it's incumbent on you to figure out what that reason is, not what you believe it to be, but to go out and unearth and investigate what your customer says that specific criteria has to be. So I just want to walk through a couple examples. Here, I have a Ford F-250 pickup truck, very popular on construction sites. I'm sure that there's some equivalent in the UK. I'm sure there's equivalents in Asia. That you have the buyer of this truck has some very specific requirements and needs. He or she, even just looking at the picture, we've got somebody there towing a skid steer loader. They have a small front end loader there. This is a truck that has to be very rugged. It has to haul equipment. It has to, it's going to go over very rough terrain. You're probably only going to be spending a certain percentage of your time on paved roads, but it's going to be muddy construction sites. And you certainly don't want this. You want a truck that's able to get through those and get into those locations and haul a lot of weight, and it's actually there to perform a job. So that customer, from my speculation, well, we're probably talking about a contractor. We're talking about somebody who is one of the workmen on the facility. He or she is going to be driving that skid steer loader. Maybe it's a job foreman. They're worried about, in my opinion, dependability. They're worried about hauling weight. They're worried about how many, what tools they can carry. Can they can they connect and have a trailer that will pull a skid steer loader? They're very worried about certain functional criteria. And then, but I would compare that to somebody who's going to buy this particular version of a Ford. I'm not really sure what this truck does, except probably go really fast in dirt. This is a truck that's out there to race. I can see the grandstands in the back. We're out here to have we're here to have some fun. I would speculate that we're looking at somebody who is, this truck has to go fast. This is probably, look how shiny that is. Good Lord, you're never going to see that attached with a skid steer loader in the back, slopping through mud, unless that was the race that took them through mud. I might speculate that this is, a younger buyer, maybe a young male looking to have his truck be kind of macho for him. But that's a very different set of needs than the needs of this construction manager. This construction manager has a different function that he or she is looking to complete versus this particular purchaser. Yet they're both Fords, and they're both Super Duties, and they're both, large engine trucks. So from Ford's perspective, well, they're both trucks, yet the way I would reach that person and the problems I'm solving for each of those groups is very, very different. And I would argue that even within your organizations, within the medical space, it's very, very different. The chief financial officer within a healthcare system has very different criteria on what is valuable than a doctor or a nurse might have in using a particular device or therapeutic or diagnostic. So I want you to start thinking about, who is my customer? Who are all my customers? Because it's more than just one. So to that end, there are 4 basic groups of customer types who get involved in the purchase decision. There's the actual user of the product. So in my previous example, it's the person who's driving the pickup truck that's hauling the skid steer loader. What are his or her motivations? There's the buyer in the equation. Now, sometimes that can be the same user, but if the buyer in the skid steer loader example is, maybe it's the construction company owner who's going to go in and buy 6, 8, 10, 12 Ford F-250s. What are his or her motivations? Well, his or her motivations might be related to price. It might be related to the warranty. It might be related to frequency of having to, oil changes or whatever it is. Whereas the user is mostly worried about getting around the facility, the construction site. Conversely, then the third person at the table could be the payer. So who is the payer in this equation? So, well, it could be the chief financial officer, who is going to be worried about, what are the terms? What are the interest rates that I'm going to have to pay? How much money am I going to have to put down? If I buy a Chevy truck, if I have General Motors truck, is that going to be cheaper in the financing side, yet have the same functional criteria that the user and the buyer want to have? But again, it's a different set of criteria. And finally, there's influencers and saboteurs who have not necessarily a direct impact, but can whisper in the ears of all of these people. If all of your friends and neighbors are driving Ford pickup trucks, your colleagues and co-workers are driving Ford because they like how it works, that's going to have an influence on you. Are you going to buy a Ford, or are you going to be contrarian and buy a Toyota or a Honda or a General Motors? But all of these people here have influence in the decision. So and I'm going to put up some ecosystem maps in a second, but you need to understand that that purchase decision doesn't take place in a vacuum. That there are a number of people who are at the table who get involved in the buying of your product. So you need to understand everybody who's at that table and what their motivations are going to be, positive or negative. And so what I'm really talking about here is the ecosystem that exists around your product. And this is particularly important for science and medical solutions, heavy engineering and solutions, but particularly medical solutions, where I want everybody to start to draw a map around this. And I'll show you some of the maps that I think you should be drawing, because these are the people that I'm going to encourage you to go talk to understand what's involved in this process. So an ecosystem has a lot of players. It's really everybody in an organization, any organization who touches your company, your solution, and who can have a potential impact, positive or negative, on the outcome of the purchase decision and the use of your product. They can be competitors, right? We talked about influencers and saboteurs. A competitor can come in and say, well, I sold for IBM for a while, and the old saying goes is that nobody gets fired for recommending IBM. And it was very easy for me to plant the seed of, I know you want to buy a Dell computer, and this is back when Dell was nobody. Well, okay, are they going to be there for you when for your warranty work? Are they going to be there for your broader needs when you need bigger systems, et cetera, et cetera? And it was very easy for me to be a saboteur because I had that solution. The converse side is that I've also been on the other side where I've been the upstart, and I was able to say, look, IBM's not solving this problem for you. I'm solving this specific problem for you, because to them this is not a big enough market, so why wouldn't you choose me? But you need to talk to folks like that. Distributors, you're all not going to go door to door selling your product. You're not going to go door to door, doctor to doctor, hospital to hospital, pharma company to pharma company selling your product. You're going to have a distributor that is going to do that work for you. What are their expectations? What do they want out of a product? What sort of support are they going to expect from you? What do they see as the competitive landscape? Finally, and particularly not finally, but regulators are big in your space. What is the process? What are regulators going to care about? Are there other suppliers that you're going to need for a pivotal piece of equipment? What are they looking for from you? And what are the substitutes? Every one of you has competition right now. Every one of you, the problem that you are solving has a solution, even if the solution is to do nothing. And that's a critical thing that I want everybody to keep in mind, because one of the biggest things that I run into when I see academics come in with new solutions is that they completely, utterly underestimate the power of inertia. The power to do what you've been doing and to continue doing what you've been doing can be crushing to a startup. And the amount of lifting in both education and marketing and training support can be overwhelming to overcome the existing solution. So understand how are they handling this problem today, and what is going to be enough, in quotations, to motivate them to move on to a new solution, particularly your solution. So ecosystem maps, and these are just some very rough ones that I'm going to get through, and we can talk about. I do have one for a diagnostic at the very end here, but here's a quick one. This is the ecosystem for Android. Android sits in the operating system for Google, sits in the middle of this chart. Yet it interacts with consumers. It interacts with the OEM the phone manufacturers, basically everybody except Apple these days. Now that BlackBerry has ceased, but so Google has to worry about what the OEMs are going to do. Are they going to adopt all of Google's changes? The OEMs have to worry about what Google is doing. What changes is Google making? And how do I adapt to that? Do I want to adapt to all those changes? Then there are also the app developers who are coming in and saying, okay, I want to be able to sell on Android, so I need to have my people be ready to work in that space, to react to that space. And then you have people who are freelancers, people who are trying to sell to Google, people who are trying to sell ideas and concepts to Google. Another one, here's one that I'm familiar with. I had a team in iCore that was making a solution for battery components. They had they were building the separator in batteries, and I won't go into the technical side of all of that, but they were a very small piece in the final battery construction of the lithium-ion battery. And they thought that their solution was going to be with EVs, with electric vehicle companies. Well, what they quickly found out is that they also had to go and talk to the battery component manufacturers, and these are the big ones. These aren't getting into the small subcomponent, but these are the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, the LG Chems, the BASF. Before they could even talk to General Motors and Ford and Toyota as a final customer, they had to know that they had the folks on the left side of this slide on board. what were their motivations to adopt a new separator? Even if Ford, they did go and talk to Ford and Toyota, etc., and Tesla, but it was really almost a secondary discussion until they were able to work together to figure out what were the needs of the suppliers, the battery companies, and how did that fit into their ability to solve a problem for the actual vehicle manufacturers. This is an example that I was going to have Susie speak about. I had Susie and her team in one of my I-Core sessions. And again, this is a broad overview of what she ran into with her solution, which was, so she had the users where she had a solution for the users and the surgeons and the patients in the buying system. Yet, but she also had to worry about that they were actually secondary to the problem, because she had to get on board the tissue manufacturing companies, who then had to get that through the hospital approval boards, and who then would decide if they were even going to allow that tissue replacement product to be brought into a hospital. So there's the risk assessment board at a hospital. There's the tissue processing companies that she had to work with. All of those were irrelevant if the insurance companies weren't going to pay for her solution and reimburse for the solution, because the patient, even though they might want the solution, didn't necessarily have the money to pay for it without insurance support. So she had to understand the insurance landscape and what would be involved with getting her product adopted by the insurance companies and given an expense code, etc. And finally, she came to understand what the influencers of her ecosystem are: the Federal Drug Administration in the U.S., key opinion leaders, the American Society of Surgeons. There's always a group, a sanctioning group that oversees many of these industries. So how is it that an accrediting agency, what is their influence going to be? If the American Society of Engineers say, no, this tissue replacement product is, we do not endorse it and we don't support its use, suddenly your company has a very big problem to overcome. And all the other people in these three boxes become irrelevant, because the vast majority of surgeons are going to say, well, I'm not going to use this, and my hospital won't approve it, and insurance won't pay for it. So you need to understand exactly who has the outsized influence in all of this. Here is the and this is actually not even vaguely as complex as it actually is, but here is a diagnostic test from another I-Core company, where they saw the ecosystem of who they had to interact with, not only from the physicians and the chief medical officers at hospitals, but to the payers, to the distributor, Cardinal Health McKesson, to the various insurance agencies and professional associations. And what's interesting about this particular slide to me is that it starts to also lay out how information and influence flows. It also lays out who is doing what is the activity, who's educating who's doing the marketing, who's doing the sales, and it also lays out how the dollars flow. So the fact is that, one of my biggest fears, I always cringe when a new company comes to me and tells me that they're going to compete on price, that their cost is going to be radically lower than their competition. And it tells me that they never laid out a chart like this. Because when you lay out a chart like this and start to understand exactly what the distributor wants, what the testing requirements are, et cetera, you typically will find that the cost savings of your product are a very small piece of the overall cost of delivering it to the final user. So I encourage everybody in the room to draw out a map like this. No questions. Okay, I want to move on to value props at this point. A value prop essentially answers why somebody's going to use your product. Why are they going to listen to you? Why are they going to give you the time of day? Why are they going to write you a check? And these are the three things that I always look for in a good value prop. It explains how it solves a specific customer problem. You can quantify the value in most cases. This isn't always true in consumer cases, but certainly within medical solutions, you're going to have to talk about, well, how am I improving this? What is the efficacy increase here? Why should I do this? What is that criteria for the user, buyer, payer in your ecosystem? And it really tells your customer, your ideal customer, why they should buy from you and not your competition. It really defines the uniqueness. And I always say that you should be able to state your value prop in a way that an 11-year-old child would understand it. If you have to get into the technical details of it, you don't know your value. You haven't identified value. You're selling me on how. Value is about why. People always buy because of why, not because of how. So again, a couple more examples. Why does somebody buy a minivan? Well, I'm guessing they've got kids, they have to haul them to practice, they're trying to move a lot of people in one economical, cheap, easy to park, easy to drive template. Imagine that value prop compared to this value prop. Here's a Tesla. I swear that in California it's the law that you have to own one. Yet the value prop for this, here's a $110,000 car. I suppose the value prop is eco-friendly, though I've been told, I have a good friend who says it's not really eco-friendly as much as it's ego-friendly for the buyer. Again, this person is buying it to, everybody knows that I have enough money to buy a Tesla. I'm also eco-conscious, etc. But that's a very different set of needs that are being fulfilled than the minivan. So I'm going to give you a template in the next slide that I will encourage all of you to use. But essentially, these are the basic mistakes in value props. It's imposing your opinion in the value prop. There shouldn't be any shoulds in a value prop. The value prop needs to say, you are going to buy this product because it solves this problem. Not because you should solve the problem, but because you have this problem and you're worried about solving it now. Words ending in ER, better, faster, cheaper. What does better mean? How much better? Is it fewer deaths? Is it shorter patient stays? Is it shorter time in the surgery, etc.? You need a specific. Another trap is that you fall into features. I always get this with new teams. Well, we make it from gallium arsenide buckyballs with boron nanotubes. And the easiest way to see if when somebody says that to you is to just turn to them and say, so what? I want you all to, when you have your value prop, to have somebody say to you, so what? What is the value of boron nanotubes? Well, they're lighter. So what? Well, they take up less space. So what? Well, when you use a boron nanotube, your plane's lighter and you will use less fuel when you're flying. Oh, okay. So that's why I care about a boron nanotube. It's because I'm going to save fuel. It's going to be fuel efficiency that's going to matter to me if I'm an airline manufacturer. Finally, it's not understanding what that metric is for your customer. So it's important that you know what that metric is because you're going to be held to it whether you realize it or want to or not. So here's a sheet that I will, and you will have access to this slide deck, but I want you to fill out this form. And our product helps our customer segment solve this or do this particular job by, and then just fill it in by, et cetera, et cetera. It should not take longer than this sheet. If it does, you don't know it well enough. You don't know your customer or your solution well enough. You really need to get this down. I made Susie and I make all my I-Core teams put it into a tweet length, 140 characters, not words, but characters, and say, this is what I do, who I do it for, and why they should care. That's what this form really is here to solve. So how are you going to get all this information? And what we do, what we're really looking for here is data. And this is a great quote from William Deming, the process engineering guru from back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, who essentially nearly wiped out the big three automakers by showing Japan and ultimately Korea how to build cars cheaply and efficiently. Without data from your customers, you're just another person with an opinion. This is just your confirmation bias and your ego saying this is what the solution has to be. So we want you to go out, I want you to go out and talk to your customers and have them tell you what has to be solved. So many of you hopefully recognize this as the scientific process. I'm going to ask you to hypothesize what it is that your customer wants solved. I'm going to ask you to go interview those customers based on that hypothesis. And then I want you to analyze and then adjust and then keep on doing this loop. When I do this for the National Science Foundation, in 6 weeks, teams have to interview at least 100 members of the ecosystem. And the critical piece here is that you are now collecting data points that get to be very hard to ignore. And the key trick in all of this is that you can't talk about your technology. I don't want you talking about your technology or your solution, but I want you talking about the problems that they have, solving the problem that you are proposing to fix. And the only way for you to do that is to get out of the building, to get out of your comfort zone and go and talk to individuals who are solving this problem today and how are they addressing this problem today. So what are you trying to learn? This is my version of a business hypothesis that I took from Michael Schrage, the innovator's hypothesis. Business hypothesis is a testable belief about value creation. To put it another way, a specific person does a specific thing for a specific reason. So there's 3 hypotheses baked into that one sentence that you need to validate. Who is this specific person? What is the behavior that they are taking today, and why are they doing that? Are they doing it for a budgetary reason? Are they doing it for a patient outcome reason? Are they doing it to reduce risk? It has to be a person. And that's the other critical piece here. Who is it that you talk to? I always see people coming up to me and say, well, I'm going to talk to hospitals. Well, who at the hospital? Hospital's filled with a lot of people. You're going to talk to the orderly in the OR? Oh, no, I'm going to talk to the doctors. Well, which doctor? If you have a cardiac care solution, then you're obviously just talking to the cardiac care people. But who else? The risk committee, the chief financial officer, what are their motivations? And the only way to get this data is for you to make an assumption. You've already made assumptions about your solution. By inventing it, you've made an assumption that it's wanted and needed. What I want you to concentrate on is now going to validate those. So an example might be, I'll use the battery example since I don't know all of your technologies. A lead acid battery manufacturing engineer uses a lithium ion deposition technique because she wants to increase the charge acceptance of the battery. So built into that is there's a specific person who's making a decision to use a particular device or technique in order to result in a specific outcome. So what I would be trying to find out in that situation is how much better does my solution have to be? How much better does the charge acceptance have to increase in order for that engineer to decide to use my product? And that's really what I want you all to be motivated to look for. So the basics. So these are some of the biggest issues that I want you to ask, because I don't want you to talk about your technology. If you talk about your technology, it's like, hopefully you can see this, I'm holding up a pen. It's like coming into somebody and saying, what do you think about my new pen? And suddenly they'll talk about your pen. Well, it feels a little narrow in my hand, and I don't like the way it clicks, I don't like the color ink. And they're talking to you about the pen, and you will think that, okay, I've got a great solution to solve the pen problem, and you'll walk out of that meeting never learning that they have just stopped buying pens because they've gone fully digital. So I want you to understand, what is the biggest problem that your solution has to address? What is the biggest issue that they face today in solving the problem? Not what is cool about your technology, but what's the biggest problem that they have? So separate desires from action. This is a critical one. We all work out, we all eat right, we all drink in moderation, we all drive the speed limit if somebody asks us that. But the reality is, what do we actually do? What are the, well, you know, I would love to have it so that I could have 5 engineers working on this problem. Well, how many engineers do you have working on the problem? Well, I have 1, and she's only on at half time because that's all my budget allows. Separate the differences between what they say they want to do versus, so I always ask about action. I always ask about action. How big is this problem, and how are you dealing with it today? So what I get into here is this a must-have solution, or is it a nice-to-have solution? Are you solving problem number 15 on the list, or are you solving number 1? If somebody is getting yelled at to solve this problem by their boss every single day, that's a problem that they will be motivated to act on. How are they addressing this? What is the inertia that you have to overcome? And finally, what I want you to learn is, how good, in quotations, does your solution have to be for them to consider changing? What's involved in changing to another solution? Do they have to scrap inventory? Do they have to get rid of old machinery? Do they have to get, if you're going to attach to an existing piece of machinery, are you going to have to get approval from that manufacturer? What's involved to get them to change, and how good does the change have to be? Probably a 1% increase is not enough to spur action, but a 20% increase might be, but you need to figure out how much that is. So when you're interviewing somebody, I encourage 2 people to go into the interview, 1 to take notes and 1 to conduct the interview. It's too hard to follow body language, etc., with somebody to understand where they're paying attention, where they aren't. Disarm politeness. People are going to be nice to you. They're not going to want to tell you that, what I always say is, I'm working on a new solution to address heart rate monitoring, and before I spend any time going down a path on what I think is the right solution, I wanted to talk to some experts to have them tell me what the problem is in the space. So please be brutally honest. Don't worry about what I'm working on, or even I'm not really working on anything in any depth yet. I need to understand what you're doing, and that's the being humble piece of the equation. You are going to them because they are the experts in the space dealing with this problem day in, day out. So I want you to be humble, and that you're seeking information and support from them. Don't sell, okay? I can't tell you, I can sniff out a salesman a mile away, and I can get them out of my office, and they think that they have had the greatest sales call of their life, and I will never speak to them again. Don't talk about your technology. This gets back to talking about the pen. Don't talk about your tech, because your tech is irrelevant. What's relevant is the problem they have and how they're solving it today, and what's their motivation to change how they're solving it today. And finally, don't ask them what they want, because they will build you something that is, they'll be a kid in a candy store, and they won't be able to, they will articulate something that is far too expensive for you to deliver in any usable, functional, profitable way. What are the 1 or 2 things that have to be solved today? And can you build a business around solving those problems today, and then solving problems 3 and 4 a year from now, and 5 and 6 2 years from now, etc. Failure modes in interviewing: talking to people like yourself, talking to your friends and family. You know, my mother lied to me. I am not the handsomest boy in the world, and I'm not the smartest. Chances are your friends are going to lie to you about your solution. So you want to go and hear bad news, which gets me to number 2. If you're only hearing good news in the interview process, you're doing it wrong. You want to unearth what's wrong with your solution right now so you can adjust it and fix it. Conducting technical interviews are pointless, as I've hit on. Group interviews and emails are worthless at this stage. Because in a group interview, there's always that guy. And by that I mean there's always that one person who ends up steering everybody else's discussion. So group interviews are irrelevant. I would just speak to people one-on-one. Email answers are pointless because you don't know who actually filled out the email question. And you can't follow up and ask why. And that's the critical question that I want you to ask. Every answer you get, you should ask the interviewee, well, why did you make that decision? What was the thought process behind that decision? Why did you decide to go down that path? Why is it that you're using 1 engineer part-time and instead of 5 when you say that it's that critical? That's how you're going to unearth what the metrics are that are going to decide and drive your decision process. Finally, we call it confirmation bias. The easiest person to fool in this process is yourself. You've been working on this solution for months, perhaps years, on this idea, and you view your solution as this beautiful, cute little puppy. Who wouldn't want this diagnostic? It's so cute, it's so wonderful. The reality is that when you talk to your customers, you're going to find out that they may view your solution as somewhat of a less than attractive baby. This is Mr. Bean. I believe that's Mr. Bean's head for our folks in the UK on top of that baby's body. Understand that your perception is not the reality. We want to make sure that you are building the product that somebody wants. So in conclusion, when you're doing these interviews, be a rabbit. Big ears, very small mouth, twitchy nose, trying to sniff out any data. So you're not talking a lot, you're listening a lot. Don't be an alligator. Alligators have big mouths, they have no ears, they're doing all the talking and they're not listening. So I want you to be the rabbit so that you can collect up this information. And so I believe I landed the plane right on time, Shiraz. I believe that I got here and I had it done in an hour. So I'd like to open it up at this point for questions.
No, that's really great. It's perfect. And some of the points, a lot of the points you actually mentioned about interviews really echo to my research, which is quite qualitative. And yeah, it's very useful to hear about the listening is very important, and also approaching those people that you don't be afraid of negative comments. I guess they're always constructive when it comes to developing products.
Quick point on that, Shiraz, that I want to make about customer discovery interviewing. Everything you're going to learn during these interviews, you were going to learn anyway. You were going to learn this information when you tried to sell it, and suddenly people who said that they loved your idea would suddenly, all of a sudden, wouldn't reach for their wallet because you didn't drill down deep enough. So I tend not to view it as negative feedback. I tend to view it as data you don't have yet. And so I really encourage everybody to view it that way.
That's great. We do have one question that came before the webinar from David Bassett, and that was, what is the most effective way to reach out to new customers within the tissue engineering field? Which I think you touched on quite poignantly in terms of influencers and the ecosystems and approaching those sorts of characters and people.
Yeah, so some of the other ideas that I have for approaching is, you doubtlessly have people in your Rolodex, in your iPhone contact list And so you need to have everybody you know knowing who it is, that the type of customer that you want to talk to. So I want to talk to a digital engineer working at this type of company or working on this type of project. The other places that I love going are trade shows, not academic conferences, but trade shows, and getting a list of the companies that were there, but more importantly, the attendees. And I also reach out to the people who presented at these conferences, because by definition, they love talking about their industry. So, dear Mr. Smith, I saw that you spoke at the annual digital engineering conference for, Internet of Things, blah, blah, blah. Can you give me 5 minutes of your time on the phone? I'm working on a new project that I'm trying to investigate. I just need 5 minutes, and I'd like to follow up with some of the questions on your presentation. So I love trade shows. I love getting the names of those attendees. Those are usually, if you can attend one and just walk the sales floor, that's a captive audience. They have to be there. Those booths have to be there. And so go during the keynote presentation, because you've got, the floor is relatively empty, but the booths are still manned. And it's not that you're going to get specific, useful, actionable data from that person in the booth, but invariably you can get an introduction to a person back at that company.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fascinating point, because it's actually, within regenerative medicine, it's obviously quite a developing field, and quite a small field in a way as well, small sector. And I guess it's a missed opportunity sometimes to approach those people actually face the customers more than the academics or the researchers, because they will be happy, I guess, speaking about their experiences and those people they might know of, or could be key opinion leaders that they know of, who could offer some better insight. So connecting through them, I think, is quite useful, definitely. Because it's quite siloed, as you say. Even a conference like TERMIS, or we have one called ISCT, which is, again, International Stem Cell Therapy Society, and TERMIS is international as well. But those groups are, majority are academics, and I think you need to approach it, as you say, from the other end of it. Distributors and who's going to supply it and where the customers are, and it's sometimes out of your comfort zone. But
so here's my take on academics, and if Susie were here, she could actually. I yelled at her so much for this. Is that the very first academic you find that has gold ingots falling out of his or her pocket to buy your stuff, I'm happy to have you go interview that person. My experience with academics is they have no money and they want your product for free so they can play with it. Academics and researchers, from my perspective, are useful to the extent that they can introduce you to, they might know somebody that they can introduce you to in the commercial space. Academics and researchers just do not have the money to spend. They will be an influencer for sure, but you need to get to the person who's going to write you a check and see what their motivation is.
And that quite neatly rolls on to another question we've had, which is how can you best influence the influencers? So you mentioned this point of the concept of influencers, and they might be those characters within ecosystems with the loudest voices, or that sort of thing. And how do you best approach them and influence them about your product, and perhaps get them on board in a way?
So the first, number one, you need to understand there's not just one influencer. When I'm investing in if somebody comes, an academic or somebody comes to me with an idea to invest in, I will tell him bluntly in the first meeting, I said, I'm going to go find your worst academic enemy and have him or her trash your idea. What are they going to say about that? And so I want to understand the landscape. Now, that's not how I would interview. How I would interview with an influencer is, so the point of that story is who are these influencers at the table? So it's probably a handful. It's probably 3 or 4. What I really care about is what they are saying and what is their current position vis-a-vis my solution. And so, you know, and I'll just make it ludicrous. I'll make it an absurd example. If an influencer said that the unit has to be painted blue because it makes the patient feel more comfortable, and you only have a solution that can be painted yellow with pink stripes, you've got a problem. You either have to change, you need to figure out how much you have to spend, how much time and resources and effort to change the influencer's opinion, or is it cheaper to just paint the thing blue? And so influencers, I want to know what they're saying, because influencers can only get you so far. There's going to, for every influencer, maybe they can affect 5 companies in a positive way, but might affect 2 companies in a negative way. For me, the influencer, again, is somebody who you can meet, figure out what their hot button is. What is the point that they are most concerned about? And they can be useful in starting to identify what the metric has to be. But understand that, okay, they say that the metric is reduced patient stay. That's okay, but understand that they have their own confirmation bias. Because once you go and interview the CFO at a hospital, she might say that, well, it's readmissions. I'll tell you right now, I got to get my readmission rates now. I don't care how long they, you know, I'm willing to let them stay an extra day in the hospital if it drops my readmission rate by X. Now, ideally, they'd want both, but, you know, so just be careful about what the influencers do for you, because the problem with key influencers is what I like to call bright, shiny things. Influencers are sort of in the business of finding the next bright, shiny thing, and you are a bright, shiny thing for a narrow window of time before the next bright, shiny thing comes into play. So I would rather you focused on talking to customers and knowing exactly what the metric is that you have to deliver with your value prop.
Definitely, definitely. I think it's a very interesting point you made about approaching those players in hospitals as well, and seeing where, I guess, where the wider implications of your product might be and the benefits as well. Rather than just technical points. And I'd sort of urge everyone in this call to kind of go out and think about that broader context of the implications of your product in the healthcare setting. But in this area, I'm guessing most of the people developing products will be around medical devices and very technical products to improve either the process of growing stem cells or delivering them in a way. So it's very important to think about the wider context.
Yeah, if you are selling into a hospital, and you know, I will give away the end of the story a little bit here. If you're walking, at least in the United States, if you're walking into a hospital and you are not talking to risk assessment committees, if you're not talking to CFOs, if you're not talking to insurance companies about reimbursement, you are essentially wasting your time. I cannot be blunter than that. This ecosystem maps that I drew out, at least in the States, I can't speak to the EU, are so complex, and that decision-making process is so complex and has so little to do with the actual doctor using it that it will be stunning to a number of you. Get Susie to talk to these folks. She understands painfully how that process played out.
Definitely. And yeah, so within Europe as well, we have recently I've read about this society called the European Connected Health Alliance. I think that they're sort of perhaps a solution that some people could dip into. So they link up the hospital providers and those people are actually practicing with people providing solutions. So they have different societies around Europe, and maybe that'd be a worthwhile link to provide ECH Alliance.
Yeah, I sort of vaguely remember there's either a neurological or an orthopedic society in one of the Scandinavian countries that has outsized influence You know, you need to understand that sort of piece. You know, the Israelis do a exceptional work on diagnostics, medical devices, so they understand how to, you know, to your degree of talking to companies there. You know, you can do this via video chat like we're doing right now. Those are great conversations to have.
And how about patients? So within the UK, there's a push now with most of the research funding bodies to have patient advisory groups. So how do you see someone developing product approaching that sort of group of individuals?
To me, the patient piece of it, it really depends on where your solution fits in. If you're talking about a stem cell solution, or if you're talking about a surgical device, I'm not sure that the patient has enough influence. I think that they are peripheral to the, at least here in the States, they're a peripheral piece of the equation, because at the end of the day, if I'll use the example here in the United States, is that if insurance here in the United States is not going to reimburse for the use of a particular device, it's really irrelevant what the patients want. It's irrelevant what the doctors want, quite frankly, if insurance is not going to reimburse. Because unless you have a solution where the patient is going to pay out of their own pocket for, I think it's important to know, and they can be helpful to you, but they aren't even a secondary influencer in my experience. They're more of a tertiary influencer in the process. But now, again, I'm not familiar with these patient groups in the EU or the UK.
Yeah, so I guess it's somewhat before the product development, sort of guiding research, and we have a push for developing impact statements and impact awareness. So that's part of that initiative for research councils.
Yeah, the biggest problem with patients is that we're always making more of them. You know, that the first step is, so they're really, quite frankly, they're fungible to the process. That they are, one patient pretty much looks like another. And so that I would concentrate on the doctors, I would concentrate on the infrastructure that's going to impede you. So if that patient group could impede you, then I would definitely look to understand why they would want to impede you.
Okay. We've just got another question here. It says, I think there's a previous slide it's referring to. What does QUAD stand for? QUAD.
Oh, that was the name of the company that was in that example. It was quantitative. Was a drug delivery therapeutic of some sort. Was a reagent company. And I'm blanking on exactly what they did. I've done about 400 National Science Foundation teams, so they all kind of blend together, sorry to say, after a while.
Just want to say, if anyone's got other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Viktor directly. So in terms of the qualitative data and collecting interviews and sort of quotes from these different characters, how would you then sort of present it or summarize that feedback in a tangible way to sort of develop or iterate your product?
So part of it is simply the raw horsepower of having enough data points. You know, while I don't have a science background, I do know enough to say that you don't run an experiment one time and then decide that you have a solution. Everybody in this room who's come up with a solution has run their experiments numerous amounts of times. To me, in I-Core, we ask for a minimum of 100 interviews with your ecosystem. I'll be frank, if you're really serious about commercialization, that number probably should be closer to 400, 500 interviews. You need to collect enough data points to start to see the trends come out. If invariably what I see with teams that come into the National Science Foundation program is they are solving problems A, B, C on the list. And they will go and they will interview 30, 40 customers in their space and come to the realization that their customers really want the problems B, F, and G solved, and A and C are a little bit further down the list. So the goal here is to have enough data points to make an intelligent, well thought out decision to tweak your technology. I can't, there's no magic number, but I will say that, 40 or 50 interviews is where you start to see it. It takes you about 10 to 15 interviews to start to get good at it. And it's usually somewhere around 80 or 90 where you're comfortable with the data you're getting. The other point I want to make about these data points is, I'll use the example of, somebody comes in to pitch me looking for money, and I say, well, I'm going to go find your worst enemy. If that person can say, well, I interviewed 200 of the top, I interviewed 50 of the top heart surgeons, I interviewed 50 of the biggest hospital systems in the country and around the world, and this is the data that I collected. You can show specifically then that you have data about the marketplace that I don't have, that nobody else has. You have first level, first tier data that is, I won't say indisputable, but is certainly, you now have data points to say, okay, look, no, this is what the head of buying at Kaiser Permanente in California told me. This is their metric. This is the metric at the Henry Ford clinics in Detroit. This is the metric at Dallas Parkland in Texas. And you now have data that is, as opposed to me saying, well, what's the metric in Dallas? And you're going, well, I'm just going to save more lives. No, it's about collecting data and having crisp answers to those questions.
Definitely. I think there's a tendency maybe to get stuck in the process itself rather than collecting data and a variety of different opinions, maybe.
Yeah, the next company that comes in having it 100% right will be the first company. I've never had a company not learn just huge amounts of teams not learn huge amounts of information from this type of approach. It's why the business plan idea doesn't work, right? It's like you draw this business plan in a vacuum, and then you go interview 50 people and you realize, wow, I don't even need to spend any marketing money on that group. I need to be worried about this group over here.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to move on to, actually. So from your experience, so you come from a different industry, and you said this idea of business plans has sort of gone away, but has the expectation for sort of VCs and when you're looking for investment, is the expectation still there that you have some sort of business plan?
So I think that varies
criteria they have
around the world, quite honestly. The VCs I know simply, it became a joke where, when somebody would put their financials in front of me, I would cut the revenue projections in half and I would triple the expenses. That was the first math I did. And so it became a joke. It became non-relevant or irrelevant rather, to go through this. Here in the United States, it's growing. It is growing. This business model approach is becoming increasingly important because investors simply don't believe you need to prove to us that you know your market better than anybody else. And then we can get into discussions about, is this a problem worth solving? Okay, yeah. And then we can get into how much it's going to cost to solve that problem and reach everybody. If this is not a problem worth solving, thanks for coming, but we need to, we're going to move on to the next presentation. And really, it's becoming, I've seen money raised on one sheet of paper. It's really about the founder's knowledge of the marketplace. I will tell you the worst presentation that I see now, and this is a throwback presentation, is I see academics and engineers come in and essentially club us to death with their CVs and that presentation is designed to stop questions. It's essentially, there's even a name for it. It's the "I'm smart, give me money" presentation. And that presentation just doesn't work anymore. I mean, we want you to be smart. But we want you to be smart in a way that says, I believe that that person, when they hit the pothole, as they invariably will, is smart enough to figure out a way around the pothole and isn't going to let their own confirmation bias sink this company.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I had. I'm just going to call on 3 people. I just looked at the registration list and I'm going to be very sneaky. So there's 3 teams represented in this call today. There's Bart from STEMZIT. There's Kate from Cytochroma, and we've also got Emma Cavalli, which she's from another company from ETH Zurich. So if you guys have got any questions in particular about your pitch deck that you're preparing for next week, feel free to ask now. Maybe how to structure them, other points you could focus on.
You've put them on the spot.
Maybe.
Nobody wants to answer. My advice to everybody in your pitch deck is to make the problem small, to make it imaginable for the audience. The presentations that I see, well, this is 50 million people every year come down with this problem and it's worth $3 billion, tend not to resonate. And it feels like, okay, I can Google all of that. Why should I care about this problem? And so your ability to convey, why this is a problem on a small level, and by small it can be, an individual hospital level. This solution, I spoke to Mary, blah, 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 and this solution will solve her problem to the tune of $10 million per year. And I can now show you that there are 1,000 Marys in the United States and 10,000 more around the world. Now I care about it. Now I believe that you have some insight that I can't Google. And if I can Google it, okay, then really all I'm buying is your widget.
Perfect. We've just got 3 questions more.
Sure.
So first one is relation to the competition. So in the context of the next stage of the competition, what would be the most effective way of pitching this type of information, the business canvas you showed? It seems a bit much to fit into one slide.
So what I would want you, again, I would want, and I don't know the details of your specific competition, so I want to be clear on that. I would love to know that the teams in this room know specifically who their customer is, and it's not a hospital, it's not an insurance company, it's not a device manufacturer. It's the title of that person. It's the director of risk management at a hospital. It is the senior vice president of new device development at Stryker. And exactly what is the value prop that each one of those people care about. The rest of those things are interesting to me, and certainly from a fundraising point of view, those are interesting, and I will be concerned about those. But that's data that you can get, that only you can understand and only you can get by interviewing. So knowing that the VP of product development at Stryker cares about, in this order, why they would adopt your solution first, and then the same thing about the director of risk at a hospital would be the same thing. That would, to me, that's what I would focus on. The other 7 boxes are fairly mechanical, quite honestly. If you get those 2 boxes right, they're fairly mechanical.
Definitely. Just got a question from Bart Sanders. So Bart, I can unmute you if you feel that's okay. If not, I'll mute you again. Let's try this. No, that's not let me do it. Okay, so his question was, I'll bring it up. What if you're still identifying the exact clinical need? How do you sell that if the technology is potential? So if you're still developing your, I guess, your proposition, how do you sort of sell that idea and reiterate your proposition?
So I would argue, Bart, that you're not in a position now to be selling anything if you're still developing the clinical need. The argument I would make is that the biggest problem, not necessarily the biggest, one of the biggest problems that I see teams running into is that they build a solution in a vacuum. And the example I will give you is I'm located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, about 40 miles from Detroit, so I see a lot of former automotive engineers who come in, and the one example I have is I ran into an engineer who had come up with a new technology for paint adhesion for the big three, for any auto manufacturer. And this was going to save the auto manufacturers $20 million a year. And I made him go out and interview. And what he learned very quickly, and then about interview 60, 70, is that in order for them to adopt his solution, they were going to have to tear out $20 million of equipment, and they were going to have to recertify the line, which was going to cost X number of millions of dollars, and the line was going to have to go down for 3 months, which was going to cost X number of millions of dollars more. So that the 20 million they were saving a year was an irrelevancy to the current solution. So before you can sell, you need to understand exactly what clinical problem you're solving, and is it a big enough problem that somebody is willing to pay you to have it solved? I see a lot of solutions that they look great on paper, but they are only solving the incidence rate is so low that they don't solve problems, or that the expense and the process change is so great to go to your new solution that people won't adopt it. So I wouldn't sell anything until you know exactly what problem it is that needs solving. And it's not the clinical problem. In all likelihood, it is the process problem around the clinical problem that you need to understand pretty intimately.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I think we should wrap up now, but I just wanted to ask you one last question. Are there any books or websites you recommend people to go to get templates or more advice? You mentioned Steve Blank and Osterwalder as well. So
there's the Business Model Generation by Alex Osterwalder. There's the Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank. Steve also has if you just Google Steve Blank, B-L-A-N-K blog. He has a good blog. There's also a website called AVC, so the letters avc.com. For those of you who are going to be raising money, he does some very good work. It's not all about medical devices and things like that, but it kind of gives you insight into how investors think and how they approach some of these things. Those are probably the three that I would look for initially.
Yeah. Okay, great. And how can people get back in touch with you if you've got any questions at all?
Shiraz, you have my email. Feel free to share that email with folks. I didn't have a summary slide. I should have. But again, I can email you a PDF of this. I'll email you a PDF of this presentation, Shiraz, and you can make that available to folks, and I'll add a contact slide to the end so that people can find me that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great speaking with you, and thanks for the presentation. And just to summarize, so we'll put this on our podcast channel and YouTube, just so you can access it later on. And we've got the competition next week, so hopefully everyone will be able to follow that. LinkedIn group where you can have a discussion around this topic, just on this PowerPoint slide you can see there. And I'm sure we'd love to follow up with you. Perhaps Susie will be able to have an informal chat with you about career, and also summarize the findings or some summaries of this presentation at a later point, I think,
Sure.
perhaps a 10-minute podcast.
Sure.
So yeah, with that, I think thanks very much, and we'll see you soon.
All right, folks, get out there and interview. I don't know any other solution to this problem. It would have saved me a whole bunch of money over my career, but good luck.
Have a good morning over there as well.
Thank you.
Take care.
So long.